in-law's party, she raised a glass and called me a failure right in front of 100 people. And they laughed. Loud. Like it was the truth. But what none of them knew was that I'd spent the last 2 years building something in silence. So when they raised their glasses again, and the host said, "Please welcome our new CEO," that's when she realized I wasn't the joke. I was her boss. Before we dive in, tell me, where to begin? The ballroom shimmered like a dream someone else was having. Crisp linens, towering white orchids, and the faint scent of expensive vanilla candles drifted through the air. A string quartet played softly near the grand window, where the Los Angeles skyline stretched past the glass like a painted canvas. It was all perfect. Too perfect. I stepped inside alone, my navy satin dress catching a bit of light from the chandelier above. It wasn't flashy, just enough to be seen, not enough to be remembered. Heads turned, mostly out of politeness. A few nods, a few familiar smiles that didn't reach their eyes. And then, the usual hush that followed me, as if I were a commercial break interrupting their regular programming. I walked over to the welcome table, scanning the printed seating chart on thick cardstock. Lydia Marin wasn't there. Not under M, not under O, not anywhere. I leaned in just to be sure, but the only thing I found was my reflection in the glass frame. Tired, polished, uninvited. "Excuse me," I asked the young server arranging champagne flutes. "Would you mind checking where I'm seated?" He blinked, checked a clipboard, then said, "Table 9, against the back wall by the service entrance." I nodded, murmured, "Thanks," and made my way across the room, heels muffled by the plush carpet. Table 9 sat half in shadow, half in draft, close enough to the kitchen doors that every 15 minutes brought a gust of cold air and the scent of garlic shrimp. A single votive candle flickered weakly in the center, struggling to stay lit. I lowered myself into the seat just as a hand set down a champagne glass in front of me, plastic, fogged from over-chilling and tagged with a sticker, "Odie-less." I stared at it, misspelled. Plastic. Cheap. Meanwhile, I could see the other women, perfect hair, perfect teeth, lifting delicate crystal glasses with gold-rimmed names curled in elegant script. A few of them laughed and raised eyebrows in my direction. Someone whispered, "She still shows up." Another giggled, "You know how background characters are, always hoping for a line." And then there she was, Seraphine, wife of my oldest brother, hostess of the night, the golden queen of curated appearances and sharp-edged charm. She wore white satin that shimmered with every breath she took. Her laughter rang like silverware clinking, loud enough for attention, soft enough to feel expensive. She was already mid-story, surrounded by people who hung on her every word like it was scripture. "I always say," Seraphine chirped, "the real work is knowing when to show up. Some folks only come around once things are already built, like photobombers at a ribbon cutting." A few heads turned toward me. I didn't flinch. Another woman added, "They always say they were there from the start. Funny how memories work when there's champagne." I picked up my plastic glass, turned it slowly in my hand, the sticker already peeling at one edge. The toast began before dessert. Seraphine made her way to the small raised dais beneath the chandelier. A hush settled over the room as she tapped her crystal flute, her eyes scanning the crowd until they locked, intentionally, on mine. "To family," she began, "to growth, and to knowing exactly who belongs at the table." Polite claps. "And to those who keep trying," she said, pausing for effect, turning her entire body toward me, "bless their hearts." Laughter, some loud, some restrained, but enough. Enough to let me know it wasn't a joke, it was an execution. And I was meant to sit still while it happened. I didn't move, didn't flinch, didn't excuse myself, just offered a faint smile, small enough to dismiss, strong enough to haunt. I could feel the heat in my chest, not from shame, but clarity. Seraphine raised her glass, etched, golden, glinting beneath the chandelier, and took a slow, practiced sip. I looked down at mine, smudged, plastic, misspelled. A bitter sparkle of champagne clung to the side. I didn't drink. The event coordinator stepped forward, clearing her throat gently into the microphone. We'd like to thank everyone for joining us tonight. Before we close, please stay seated for a brief message from our board chairman. I glanced toward the back wall where the crowd had mostly thinned. And there he stood, Mr. Lennox Grant, chairman of the board, silent, observing, older than I remembered, but sharp as ever. He saw me, nodded, just once, and I nodded back. Because I already knew, tonight wasn't about the toast, or the laughter, or the table I was placed at. It was about what came next. I lifted my glass one last time, plastic, misspelled, forgettable, and waited. I held up the plastic glass one last time, light catching on the cheap rim, my name spelled wrong and already fading from the condensation, and then set it down gently beside my untouched plate. The clink it made on the edge of the china felt oddly final, like closing a book I didn't remember agreeing to read. Then the mic crackled. "Ladies and gentlemen," the event coordinator's voice rang out bright and cheerful, as if we were all gathered for something far more innocent than what this evening had already become. "Please raise your glass, because it's time to welcome our new CEO." There was a ripple across the room. Not the kind that moves with joy, but the kind that sucks the air right out of it. Forks paused. A server dropped a napkin. Someone at the corner table let out a soft gasp, then immediately tried to cough it away. Eyes darted like minnows, back and forth, seeking the obvious candidate. Everyone turned to look toward the oldest of the Marin brothers, Jeremiah, Seraphine's husband. He adjusted his cuff, half lifted his glass, and then froze as the silence held. No one called his name. Then the chairman stood. A man of few words, known more for shaking hands in back rooms than making announcements in front of chandeliers. And yet, his voice cut through the tension like a knife gliding through butter. "Ms. Lydia Marin," he said evenly. "Congratulations." I didn't move right away. Not out of shock. I already knew. I took my time. Smoothed the creases of my navy satin dress, ran a hand through my curls, and stepped forward. Not too fast, not seeking the spotlight, but not avoiding it either. Just arriving. As if this was where I was always meant to stand. The murmurs followed in my wake like whispers through leaves. Wait. Lydia? Her? I thought she was just... Isn't she the one who works in compliance or something? I didn't look back. Up front, near the raised platform, the same young server who'd given me the plastic cup earlier now rushed forward with red cheeks and trembling hands. He placed a new glass on the edge of the podium, clear crystal, etched with my name in gold. This time the spelling was right. I gave him a soft nod. He didn't meet my eyes, just bowed his head and backed away. Behind me, Seraphine hadn't moved. She sat stiffly, still holding her own sparkling flute like it was fused to her fingers. The confident tilt of her chin hadn't dropped, but the corners of her lips, once curved in amusement, now pulled tight, like elastic under strain. I caught the low whisper from her left. "Wait, she's the CEO?" Her fingers twitched. Her husband leaned slightly forward, confused. I could feel the silence swelling again. So I took the mic. "Thank you," I began, my voice steady but not cold. "I've worked behind the scenes for a long time. That was always where I was placed. And for a while, I believed that was where I belonged." I paused. Let the words settle. But here's the thing about rooms like these. Sometimes the quietest person in the room is the one who built the room. A longer pause this time. I didn't rush. I let the words hang there, simple and unpolished, like wood exposed beneath a velvet tablecloth. Then, just one clap. It came from the back. I didn't turn to see who it was. Another followed, then another. And just like that, the room that had turned on me an hour ago now turned again. This time with measured respect. Not warmth, not quite celebration, but recognition. And in a family like mine, that's far more valuable than applause. I stepped down, walked slowly through the center aisle, past tables filled with eyes I'd known since childhood, eyes that had never truly seen me until tonight. And then I passed her, Seraphine. She didn't blink, just tilted her head slightly, the remnants of her smirk still clinging to her face like stage makeup that didn't wash off. "You set this up," she hissed under her breath. I paused, met her gaze with calm, deliberate silence. Then I said, "No, you just never saw it coming." I didn't stop walking, didn't wait for her reply. I didn't need to. Somewhere behind me, another server called out for dessert trays. Champagne was being refilled. The party resumed its rhythm. But a new current had begun running beneath it all. One I didn't need to direct. It had already started. Her words stuck to me like perfume. Fake, cloying, and impossible to forget. I turned away from Seraphine, but her perfume still clung to me. Like her pride, manufactured and overbearing. The clinking of glasses behind me grew distant as I stepped back toward the edge of the ballroom. Not out of fear. I needed air. Not the kind you breathe, but the kind that clears your mind when you've been pretending for too long. 6 months earlier, no one looked twice when I stayed late in the boardroom. Seraphine had just pushed through a new holiday bonus policy, one that looked generous on the surface, but quietly redirected payouts to employees connected to her inner circle. Incentives for loyalty, she'd called them. Loyalty to her, not the company. That was the final push I needed. The truth? I'd already been meeting with Jonas Merritt, our late founder's personal lawyer, for over a year. It started with a question I asked quietly during a Thanksgiving dinner while Seraphine was boasting about her husband's new promotion. "Was there ever a succession clause my father-in-law had drafted?" I had whispered, almost as an afterthought. Jonas blinked once and said, "There was, but it was sealed, until certain conditions were met." Conditions. I spent the next 6 months making sure they were. While my brothers-in-law argued about titles in glass offices they never cleaned, I sat quietly beside the accounts team. I listened. I gathered. I filed everything. No big scandals, just 1,000 paper cuts, petty misuse of funds, suspicious vendor favoritism, kickbacks, whispered deals with cousins' companies, death by ethics review. They never noticed me, which is exactly what I needed. "You don't need to fight noise with noise," Mr. Merritt had told me once on the phone. It was past midnight. He'd called after seeing the latest bonus report. "You listen, you learn, and when they've built their castle out of sand, you sign." He always ended those calls the same way. "Don't shout. Sign." So I did. 2 weeks before the gala, I walked into the boardroom at 7:00 p.m. sharp. No cameras, just the chairwoman, Jonas, and a simple manila folder. Clause 7B, it stated, in the event of misconduct, verified through a third-party ethics review, and failure to meet fiscal KPIs 3 quarters in a row, the successor named in Clause 7B shall be activated without family vote or public announcement. I signed it without blinking. I didn't need applause. I needed accountability. And now here I stood, in a ballroom full of people who once saw me as the artsy one. They'd always said it kindly, like patting a child on the head. I wore bright colors, had a design background, and didn't raise my voice in meetings. They assumed I didn't understand profit-loss sheets. They never asked how the healthcare division turned profitable in Q2 last year. I didn't tell them I wrote the fix. I didn't tell them I'd rebuilt it under Matthew's name, because they never would have believed it. But Jonas knew. And so did the board. "Excuse me, ma'am," a quiet voice brought me back. A server in a navy vest, the same one who'd handed me a plastic flute earlier, now approached with careful steps. He held out a tray. This time, the glass was crystal, etched. My name, correctly spelled in cursive. No room for errors now. I took it gently. Then he leaned in, lowered his voice. "Ms. Marin, she's asked to see you." I glanced at him. "She?" He nodded once. "Seraphine. She's waiting in the garden. Said it was urgent." Of course she was. I turned slightly and caught a glimpse of her through the open glass doors leading to the terrace. She stood by the ivy wall, arms crossed, heels tapping, lips moving fast as if rehearsing something, or unraveling. I didn't hesitate. Let the queen summon me. I had no crown to prove. I stepped through the glass doors, heels tapping against the stone path that curved softly through the terrace. The air had shifted. no longer scented with clinking flutes and sugar-dipped laughter, but something cooler, still, like the hush before a Texas thunderstorm. Up ahead, under a curtain of warm fairy lights and towering white roses, stood Seraphine. Her back was rigid, arms crossed, chin slightly raised. But she wasn't smiling now. She didn't offer me wine, no kiss on the cheek, no darling in that silky voice she always used for show. Instead, her eyes flicked toward mine and held. "You blindsided me," she said through gritted teeth, "in front of everyone." I didn't flinch. I didn't even blink. I let the night stretch around us, thick and humming with invisible tension. Then I answered, calm as ever. "You warned me once," I said, "and I listened." Seraphine's jaw clenched. For a moment I thought she might throw the champagne glass still trembling in her right hand. But she didn't. Instead, she took a slow step closer and lowered her voice like she thought we were still equals, still women behind the same curtain. "You could have told me," she hissed. "Given me a heads up. This wasn't classy, Lydia." I tilted my head. "Like the time you told me not to attend the leadership retreat because we needed people who actually understood profit margins? That was classy?" Her nostrils flared, but I didn't stop. "You were right, though. That table wasn't mine, so I built one of my own." Ice silence. Just the soft hum of the garden lights overhead and the faint sound of laughter from inside, still oblivious. She looked at me like she was trying to rewrite the story in her head, recast herself as the victim in a play she didn't realize had already closed. "You used him," she snapped finally. "You wormed your way into Dad's heart when he was vulnerable, took advantage of his legacy, of his illness, of all of us. You skipped the line." I almost laughed, not out of cruelty, but out of deep, exhausted knowing. I reached into the slim black clutch under my arm, unzipped it, and pulled out a neat, folded set of papers. I didn't hand them to her. I just held them up. "Here's the internal audit you edited with Carolyn 3 years ago. You changed bonus allocations to reward your friends. And here," I flipped another page, "this is the report you buried after an ethics flag from HR. You remember the one? About the vendor contracts your college roommate suddenly started winning." Seraphine paled, just slightly, like a porcelain doll someone tapped too hard. But she caught herself, raised her chin. "You're going to ruin this family," she said. I met her gaze. No tremble, no fire, just clarity. "I didn't ruin anything," I said quietly. "I just stopped playing dead." Her lips parted, maybe to argue, maybe to beg. But the words never came, just a blink, and then another. "You always thought I was quiet because I had nothing to say?" I added, stepping past her. "But I was just making space, so people like you could show me exactly who you are." I paused near the gate, looking back one last time. "You're still invited to Monday's executive meeting. Your name card's waiting up front. First topic, HR investigations. See you there." And I walked away. The air inside the ballroom hit different this time. Brighter somehow. I passed the dessert table without even glancing. Past groups of people who didn't look at me the same anymore. Some surprised, some calculating, a few downright wary. Just as I reached the archway near the marble staircase, a voice called out from behind me. Soft, familiar, careful. "Lydia, do you have a moment?" I turned. It wasn't Seraphine. It was Eleanor, Chairman Beaufort's wife. A woman I hadn't spoken to in nearly 6 years. She wasn't smiling. That alone told me something big had shifted. She stood slightly to the left of the ballroom arch, half tucked behind the curtain, her posture still, hands clasped neatly over her clutch. I wouldn't have noticed her if it weren't for how still she was. Everyone else was clinking glasses, adjusting collars, whispering too loudly behind napkins. But Dana Linley, she watched. I paused mid-step. For a breath too long, we just stood there. Me, in my heels, still humming from the garden's tension, and her, regal as ever in soft gold silk. Finally, she tilted her head, barely a nod, but it was enough. "Would you walk with me a moment?" Her voice just like I remembered. Smooth, practiced, never rushed. We moved through the corridor side by side, neither of us speaking as we passed staff clearing trays and guests moving toward the after-dinner lounge. She led me to a quiet alcove off the east wing, where candlelight flickered across an old oil painting of the Linley estate. I hadn't stood in that space since the night Robert had been honored for his lifetime achievement. That night, no one had noticed when I slipped away early. Tonight, Dana noticed everything. "I'll be honest," she began, settling on the velvet bench near the window. "I didn't think you'd come back. Not like this." I stayed standing, my back straight, but softened my voice. Neither did they. A smile flickered in the corner of her mouth, brief, knowing. Then her tone shifted. "I've been watching you for years," she said quietly. "Not because I doubted you, because I knew they would." My chest tightened, but I didn't interrupt. She wasn't here to flatter. "I remember the retreat in Colorado," she continued, "when Seraphine gave that ridiculous speech about protecting the image of the company, and you weren't invited. I saw you walk back to your room alone that night, Lydia. You didn't cause a scene. You just absorbed it. Quietly." I blinked. That had been 8 years ago. I'd shared a shuttle ride with the caterers just to make it to that weekend, paid for my own room, and still, Seraphine had cut me from every leadership photo. Dana glanced up at me. "Do you know what I saw that night? Control. The kind most people never learn." She leaned back, then added, "And a kind of power I recognize." I finally sat, careful with my posture. I wasn't sure anyone saw. "They rarely do," she said. "But women like us, we find each other, even if it takes time." It surprised me to hear her say that. Dana Linley had always been an arm's-length figure, refined, gracious, untouched by the family mess. I used to think she was above it all. Now I realized she was just apart from it, by choice, not ignorance. She continued, "When Robert died, he left something for you. Told me not to hand it over unless things got murky. I'd say we've hit that point, wouldn't you?" From her clutch, she pulled a slim envelope, cream-colored, heavy, sealed with wax. She offered it without ceremony. I didn't take it right away. "Why did he give it to you? Why not just leave it to legal?" Her eyes grew thoughtful. "Because even then, he knew legal could be persuaded, and I wasn't in anyone's chain of command." I nodded slowly, taking the envelope and resting it in my lap. It felt heavier than paper had any right to be. Dana stood, smoothing her gown. "Just don't open it in front of anyone," she said. "Once you read it, everything changes." The words landed harder than I expected. Not everything in that envelope would be protection. Some truths were knives. She paused, one hand on the drape. "You know, they always said I married well, but never once asked if I built anything. Truth is, I funded 27 startups behind that garden gate, most of them run by women. Quiet doesn't mean passive." I looked up at her. "Why tell me now?" "Because I'm not the one who needs to watch anymore," she said simply. "You are." We shared a long look before she turned and disappeared into the corridor. I remained seated for a minute more, staring down at the envelope. I didn't open it. Not yet. But I slipped it into my coat pocket, and somehow just holding it shifted something inside me. I wasn't here just to take a title. I was here to carry forward a line of women who'd learned to navigate silence and turn it into strength. I didn't sleep. Even after the party, after the garden, after Dana's quiet voice in my ear, I came home, peeled off my heels at the door, and left the envelope on the kitchen counter like it might explode if I touched it again. By morning, the apartment was filled with soft light, the skyline of Austin stretching outside my window like a painting too still to be real. I made coffee I didn't drink, let the toast sit cold, and I just stared at it. That envelope, it looked small, harmless, but I knew better. Some things once read couldn't be unread. Dana's words echoed again. "Once you read it, everything changes." And I believed her. I paced, sat down, got back up. I even ran the dishwasher just to fill the silence. What if what's inside ruined everything? What if it made me someone I didn't want to be? But what scared me more was the part of me that already knew I'd open it, that I had to. So, after 2 hours of avoiding it, and 5 more years of swallowing doubts, I finally pulled the seal. The paper inside was thick, cream-colored, hand-signed. I knew that handwriting. Robert Marin. He wrote in blue ink. Always did. Refused digital signatures, even when the board insisted. The letter began simply, Odalus, if you're reading this, they've done what I feared, and you're standing where I once hoped you'd be. My throat tightened. He continued without apology, without fluff, just truth. He'd discovered, nearly 8 years ago, that Seraphine had been siphoning performance bonuses tied to my division. The numbers had been tampered with, subtly, not enough to draw attention, just enough to stall promotions, redirect credits, tilt the spotlight, and then came the gut punch. She forged his signature on a vote that blocked my promotion. The year I was told, you need more field time. The same year my project was handed to Elliot, the same Elliot who accidentally once showed me an email from Seraphine saying, make it look like a team handoff. I remember the way she smiled at me after the decision, said, it wasn't personal, darling. No, it was calculated. And she'd won. Until now. The second page of the letter wasn't just a confession, it was a directive. Robert had filed a sealed clause, buried in the founder's succession documents, a clause only the sitting CEO could activate. No board vote, no appeal. It granted immediate override power to remove any executive found complicit in internal fraud, retroactively or otherwise. In other words, I could fire Seraphine. Today, quietly, fully within rights, I held the page in both hands. My chest felt tight, not from shock anymore, but from the weight of choice. Because revenge? It would be simple. But I wasn't raised on spite. I was raised by a single mother who told me, power's not what you can destroy, it's what you can walk away from and still hold your head high. And yet, Seraphine humiliated me. She stole my work. She turned my name into a punchline, and last night she did it again in front of an entire room. Mocked me, called me a failure, let the others laugh while she lifted a champagne flute like she owned the place. But she didn't. Not anymore. I sat down at the kitchen table. The letter rested beside my hand. The city buzzed faintly outside, cars and sirens and everything in between. Inside, it was still. I didn't want this to be about vengeance, but I also didn't want to let it rot, let her keep winning just because I was afraid of being one of them. I closed the folder, placed it in my desk drawer, locked it. Then I reached for my coffee, and that's when my phone buzzed. Once, then again. A name popped up. George Tennyson, board member since the 90s. He rarely texted me. Did you mean to circulate the founder's letter? It's being shared. I blinked. I hadn't sent it. My fingers went cold. The folder was still in the drawer. The seal broken? Yes, but still in my hands. I hadn't scanned, forwarded, copied, nothing, which meant someone else had. The storm wasn't coming. It had already started. The silence in my apartment stretched longer than the morning light spilling across the kitchen floor. I set the phone down slowly, its glow dimming, but the weight of the message lingered. Did you mean to circulate the founder's letter? I hadn't, which meant someone else had, and as I stared out at the skyline of Austin, something in my chest settled. Less panic, more clarity. If the storm was coming, I was done running. By the time I arrived at headquarters 2 days later, the building looked untouched. Same valet, same glass doors, same scent of roasted beans from the first-floor cafe, but inside, it was different. Subtle, but real. Conversations stopped when I walked past. A junior associate stood abruptly to open the elevator door, and as it closed behind me, I caught a whisper, "She's the one." On the executive floor, doors that usually stayed shut were cracked open. People lingered in hallways, not quite eavesdropping, but not working either. They were waiting. And then came the summons, an invite from Seraphine's office titled only Leadership Alignment, Informal, no agenda, no attachments, just a time, 2:15. That was her style, cloak it in professionalism, but sharpen the blade underneath. I didn't rush. I finished my notes, double-checked my schedule, and walked in 2 minutes late. The room was already full. Directors, VPs, a few old guard board members who rarely came in person. And at the head of the table, Seraphine, smiling like nothing had happened. "Lydia," she purred, "glad you could join us." I didn't bother replying. I took my seat at the far end of the table and let her play her hand. "So," she began, tapping a pen gently against her notebook. "Some concerning material made the rounds this week. An old letter. From Robert." She let the name hang like perfume. "It's unfortunate. We all loved him, of course, but grief can cloud a person's thinking. That letter reflects one man's state of mind, not company fact." A few nods, a few tight jaws. I waited. "And while I understand it might raise questions," she continued, flipping a page theatrically, "we must remember, leadership is about looking forward, not backward." That was her cue for applause. No one moved. I reached into my tote, pulled out the only copy I had printed, and placed it flat on the table. Not pushed, not waved, just placed. "This isn't just a letter," I said. "It's notarized, dated, and protected under a sealed board directive." Silence. I stood up, smoothed my blazer. "And for the record," I added without raising my voice, "I didn't leak it." Then I walked out. Behind me, the hush broke into a flurry of low voices and shifting chairs. Let them talk. Let her scramble. I headed straight to my office, shutting the door gently, resisting the urge to pace. Instead, I sat, turned on my screen, pulled up the building's access logs. Only 2 people had keys to my apartment besides me: Dana, my attorney and friend, and Marcus, my husband. But the logs told another story. Last Sunday, during my afternoon meeting downtown, there had been a brief entry. One swipe, 15 minutes inside, Romy N., my assistant. Romy had worked for me 4 years. Polite, efficient, a little too eager sometimes, but never untrustworthy. Or so I thought. She was the one who picked up dry cleaning, returned rental keys, made dinner reservations without asking. And maybe that's how she got in. A soft knock at my office door pulled me back. Seraphine. She didn't wait to be invited. Just stepped in, face carefully composed. "What are you doing, Lydia?" Her voice was quiet but tight. "Do you want to tear this place apart?" I looked at her, steady. "I didn't leak the letter." "But you used it. You made it public." "No, I didn't," I cut in. "But maybe it needed to be seen. Maybe Robert wrote it hoping someone would." She stared at me for a long time. Her mouth opened, then closed, and just like that, her mask cracked. Not all at once, but enough. A twitch in her brow, a tremble in her voice when she said, "You think you can take this from me?" "No," I said. "I already have." She slammed the door on her way out. I exhaled. The air felt clearer. Then I picked up the phone, dialed HR. "I need to review the employment contract of Romy N. effective immediately." The line paused. "Yes, Ms. Marin. Should we flag for legal?" "Yes. And send her badge data to IT. I want everything backed up. Right now." I hung up, looked around my office. If loyalty had a price, I was ready to pay it and end it. The air in the HR suite felt thick, too still, like the eye of a storm that hadn't passed yet. I stood just inside the doorway, watching as Romy walked in, clutching her bag tighter than usual. Her steps slowed the moment she saw me. She knew. Her face lost all color. She opened her mouth, maybe to greet me, maybe to explain. But I didn't offer her the chance. I simply held out a printed sheet from the security system. "I didn't need to guess," I said. "It's all here, time-stamped, logged." I stepped aside, allowing the HR manager to close the door behind us. Romy looked around like a trapped animal, caught between the hope of denial and the weight of truth. I didn't mean, she started, but her voice cracked. Lydia, please, I didn't mean to hurt you. You copied a legal document from my private drawer, I said, steady. You leaked it, and you did it while I was still trusting you with everything from my calendar to my passwords. She sat down across from me, her eyes wide. She said you were going to fire me. Seraphine. She said it was only a matter of time. She promised I'd get promoted if I just helped her stay ahead of things. I let the silence stretch. I needed her to hear it ring. I never expected you to be perfect, I said at last. Just honest. That's all I ever needed. Her eyes welled up, but I didn't comfort her. There was no screaming, no dramatic exit, just 2 signatures on a termination form, and a quiet escort out, handled by security like any other breach of trust. No spectacle, no shame. Just the sound of a line being drawn in permanent ink. I didn't linger in the hallway afterward. I moved quickly, straight to the elevator, heading to the executive level. The top floor where silence had teeth, and every smile came sharpened. Seraphine's office door was already cracked open when I arrived. She was seated at her desk, tapping her stylus against a marble coaster like she'd been waiting for me. Didn't think the assistant had it in her, huh? She said without turning. I closed the door behind me and stepped inside. She finally looked up. People like you always attract strays, she said, shrugging. They orbit you, hoping for crumbs. Romy was easy. Poor thing didn't even ask for proof. I just told her you were on your way out. You've made a habit of breaking people, I said, quietly, so they don't notice until there's nothing left. Her smile faltered, just slightly, but she held her pose, polished, smug, superior. She didn't see the paper in my hand until I laid it gently on her desk. It was the board's signed vote. Fraud clause activated. Seraphine's access to sensitive systems would be locked down by close of business. An internal investigation would begin Monday. She was no longer untouchable. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't flinch. I just said, "Your choice now is simple." She skimmed the paper, and for the first time, she didn't have a response ready. "You can resign," I said, quietly, "with your name still intact, or you can fight this. But if you do, I won't protect you. Every email, every transfer, every hush-hush incentive package you've ever pushed through, I'll hand it all over." Her laugh was bitter. "You think I'm scared of you?" "I don't need you to be scared," I said. "Just gone." There was a long beat of silence. She looked out her window, like maybe the skyline would offer her a better escape than I had. But she didn't speak. Not yes, not no. She just sat there, finally understanding the weight of the power she'd been playing with. I left her like that, alone, silent, still tapping her stylus, but slower now, like she wasn't sure what rhythm she'd been dancing to anymore. As I stepped into the hallway, my phone buzzed. The message was from the board's chair. "Prepare your materials. Monday is final." I stood there a moment longer, looking out the same glass panels Seraphine had just faced. But I wasn't waiting for approval or applause. I'd made my move, because power doesn't shout. It decides. The doors closed behind me, and for a long second, the boardroom stood still, air thick with things unsaid. Not even Seraphine moved. She sat poised, chin lifted, but the corners of her mouth had lost their tension. She wasn't smiling anymore. The chair of the board cleared his throat. "This morning," he began, "a special vote was conducted regarding the conduct and future leadership of Marin Tech." His voice was calm, but his hands were firm as he laid out the sealed statement. "After a thorough review of internal communications, fund reallocation records, and client disclosures," a slight shift rippled down the table. Eyes darted toward Seraphine, then back to the chairman. "The board has voted unanimously to remove Seraphine Duvaux from all executive duties, effective immediately. Her resignation has been received and accepted." The only sound that followed was the rustle of Seraphine's custom blazer brushing the arms of her chair as she slowly stood. She didn't argue. She didn't ask for another chance. For the first time since I'd met her, she looked unsure, not defeated, but no longer untouchable. No one reached to shake her hand. She gave the room a shallow nod and walked out. The door clicked shut. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was clean, like something had been exhaled after years of being held in. All eyes turned to me, but I didn't stand. I didn't offer a speech or a smile. I just said, "Let's get to work." That was it. The applause that followed didn't erupt. It built slowly, genuinely, not for victory, but for something rarer, steadiness. Later that evening, when the formalities ended and the business press had already begun speculating names and strategies, I sat in the very seat Seraphine used to claim. Same desk, same skyline view. But I wasn't interested in ownership. I was interested in what came next. My fingers traced the edge of the desk, grounding myself, and that's when I heard the laughter again, not in the room, but in my memory. The echo of that night, the glittering ballroom, the flash of camera lights, my sister-in-law's voice ringing clear over the clink of champagne glasses. "Please, everyone, a toast to the future of this company, and to our dear Lydia, who always tried her best. Bless her heart. I mean, failure isn't the worst thing in the world, right?" Her cackle had been the signal, the room had followed, they'd laughed too, some louder than others, but none of them were laughing now. Same building, same crowd. But when the chair of the board stood and said, "Please welcome our new CEO, Lydia Marin," the room went still. You could hear the HVAC humming, forks frozen midair. Even the champagne flutes seemed to hesitate. She looked up slowly, across the room. My sister-in-law's eyes met mine, and that's when she knew. I wasn't the try hard anymore. I'd earned every hour she'd mocked. Every night I stayed up while they partied. Every document I buried myself in while they posted filtered photos from rooftop spas. I had built something, with no spotlight, no applause, no cheerleading committee. Power didn't come from the mic. It came from knowing you could rise when no one clapped for you. Later, when the event thinned out and the air turned warmer with softer music and nervous attempts at reconnection, someone slipped me a folded note. Neat cursive. No name on the front, but I knew the handwriting. Dana Linley. It read, "Your father-in-law chose right, but you made him proud in your own way." I folded the note carefully and slipped it into my inner coat pocket, right where the contract had sat just days earlier. And then I breathed. Not a sigh. Just air. Finally, mine. The office lights dimmed as the staff began to filter out, and I stayed in my chair a little longer, looking out over the city. No words, no plans, just a moment, not to celebrate, not even to reflect, but to finally sit in a space I didn't have to fight for anymore. Some victories don't need a microphone. They just need time. Time to rise, time to remember, and time to prove that being overlooked